everyone, and welcome to your June edition of the Cinematic Schematic. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, the editor-in-chief and film critic at thecinematropolis.com. We're going to do something a little different this month because we did so much cool stuff for Dead Center over this month. Instead of doing a film review, soundtrack panel discussion, we're just going to stick with talking about a little film that is loosely related to our theme this month of coming of age. One that I think a lot of folks are really interested in, Hereditary. This is a film I've been looking forward to talking about for quite a while. But before we get rolling, I do want to go ahead and welcome you to the table. After taking a month off and releasing a movie to the wide world, we're rejoined by LaRon Chapman, writer, director of You People, and of course, contributor here at Cinematropolis. Welcome back.
It's good to be back, as always.
And for the first time on our more traditional episode, we have Christopher Schultz, who is a writer here at the Cinematropolis. He also joined us on our Dead Center recap and did a lot of awesome Dead Center coverage, covering short films, covering Puppet Master, and he's written about a number of other films on the website in the past. So, Christopher, welcome to the Cinematic Schematic.
Great to be here.
We're going to talk about Hereditary in one moment, but I want to catch up with you here, LaRon.
Yeah.
You put out a movie.
I did.
June, early this month.
It was my directorial debut. It's a feature film.
Feature film, directorial debut. How does it feel?
It feels really good. It feels really validating to have finally got to see it with I won't say a pretentious audience, but film festival goers it's a different experience than general moviegoers. So to get that positive response was really, really, really validating. Yeah.
Does it feel like a burden has been lifted off your shoulders?
I feel motivated to do it again now.
Excellent.
So they got the itch now. They got the director's itch.
So you are now the director. You're like, all right, on to the next thing.
On to the next thing. It's time to get busy to writing another script.
So you've got like 5 other scripts in the works?
I have 2 more ideas for feature scripts, but they are not written now.
All right. Well, we are so glad to have you back. And, we haven't had it. Last month, we didn't get to do more of a traditional review. Alexandra and I talked about Deadpool 2.
Yeah.
And it was fun, but it was like it was a slight LaRon Chapman missing.
Oh, well, that's sweet.
But I feel like this movie is a little more in your wheelhouse anyway.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Definitely, yeah.
I can't wait to talk about today's film, Hereditary. All right, everyone. So as a reminder, if you enjoy this podcast, make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcast or your preferred listening device and check out all of our work from LaRon Chapman, Christopher Schultz, and myself, all at thecinematropolis.com. But let's go ahead and jump right into this month's movie, Hereditary.
Come on, Peter. It's your suit.
It's heartening to see so many strange new faces here today. I know my mom would be very touched and probably a little suspicious. My mother was a very secretive and private woman. It's Grandma. You know you were her favorite, right? Even when you were a little baby, she wouldn't let me feed you because she needed to feed you. She was a very difficult woman, which maybe explains me.
I recognize you from your mother.
What?
Sometimes I swear I can feel them in the room.
So the synopsis for Hereditary on the IMDb reads, after the family matriarch passes away, a grieving family is haunted by tragic and disturbing occurrences and begin to unravel dark secrets.
That's putting it lightly.
Yeah, it's about as succinct as you can get, I think, with this movie. But it's so much more.
There's so much more there. But read between the lines.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's just go ahead and start with our reactions because this movie is kind of bonkers. Christopher, what was your initial reaction after seeing this film?
It very much, my head was definitely reeling from it, and I thought about it quite a bit, and I'm still thinking about it. It's been probably 2 or 3 weeks now since I've seen it, and it's still very much high in my mind. But I felt that it did go into some territory that I had seen before, but it handled it in a way that I'd never seen before, and it was just very, very intense I mean, my neck hurt from watching this, and it's not from jumping. It's not from anything like that, like jump scares. I think there's maybe one jump scare in the whole thing, but you just feel yourself tensing up through this whole thing. And you hurt afterwards. So yeah, really physically impactful, mentally impactful, which I think is the best you can hope for.
Yeah.
Lauren, how about you? What'd you think?
Well, I've often made fun of, the sea of girls behind me that will normally scream at everything that happens in it. They react to everything. But I was reduced to that at least in the third act, of the film. I normally am pretty desensitized to all forms of horror. I enjoy them for the craftsmanship and everything. But this was the first time in a long time where I was physically, like you said, tense, very uncomfortable there towards the end, because it just goes to some dark places, some that were really relatable. But what I loved most about this film in particular was that all of the horror was rooted in kind of human grief, human emotion, so everything was sprouted from that. So it made everything that was happening that much more relatable on a realistic level. So even the supernatural stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what I love about this film is it takes its time getting where it wants to go. It kind of has a very eerie opening. I noticed. I actually caught this film twice. So I caught it at the South by Southwest Film Festival, which I like 1 a.m, by the way. It was a midnight show, and because Ready Player One got started late, they pushed all the programming later.
Oh, wow.
So even though it was in a different venue, they wanted to make sure everyone who was at that movie could make it to Hereditary, because it was one night only, and it was only in 2 theaters.
Oh, wow.
So it was very late, and it was a very surreal festival-going experience. First time, this is, you go to film festivals here at Dead Center, but there's something about like these really intense horror films and a festival environment that heightens the intention because everyone feeds off each other. It's like the ideal horror audience. So it was definitely, all that said, my first viewing experience, I was kind of shocked. And disturbed.
Disturbed is the word.
Unnerved.
It's disturbing more than it's just scary. It's very disturbing.
Right. Yeah. Disturbing. I mean, it's scary and unnerving in other ways, but I think disturbed's a good way to put it. The second time I saw it was in a more traditional theater-going experience, and it was still great. The audience was still very reactive. But the thing I noticed about the second time was it's such a very eerie tone with the music cues and the visual language very early on. And that tension and just like sense of dread never really goes away.
It's there throughout the whole time. It just kind of, it thickens as it goes along, but it's always there because the characters are kind of already living in a state of horror the whole time. That's both rooted in like trauma that kind of manifests itself in different ways as they're dealing with grief for a whole host of different reasons. But
no, absolutely. And I appreciate that this film really lives in that. It lives in the discomfort of the family drama. The discomfort of the family drama is only there to set up how this thing is going to come in and exploit that. The film exploits the family drama after you spend well over an hour and a half in the end of this movie just getting to know this family and their pressure points and their weaknesses. That's when the film really starts to take advantage of you as the film goer. And I think that's what makes this, for me, this is a really outstanding horror film. And much in the same way as I would say, The Witch or The Exorcist. Like films that are great dramas, and they use horror as a means to drill down and exploit those ideas in a very heightened supernatural way.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the high level, initial reaction I had the second time, which I think it stands up very well the second time for me as well. I'm like, this is one that's going to stick around in my head. I've been thinking about it for like 3 months off and on.
Toni Collette is just like so phenomenal in it. There's that whole sequence. Are we saying spoilers?
No spoilers yet. No spoilers yet. No, yet.
Never mind.
Even without spoilers, she's fantastic in this film, and I would love to see her get nominated for some awards. I doubt it will happen.
I'm the same way. I'm on that boat. I'm like, it is deserving of one. Will it happen? it's one of those things. I mean, it just depends on how the year goes. I mean, and you know, if this film sustains any momentum. I mean, it did pretty well considering everything, but as of now. But
I think that having the conversation now is really great. I don't know. I think, is it gonna happen? Is she gonna get nominated for an Oscar? Probably not. But I will say, Toni Collette, I think, is the strongest performance in the film, and I think as long as this film is talked about throughout the year, it doesn't lose momentum. I think there's that opportunity to come around if people are still talking about it, or if the studio decides to push that, like, hey, come November, people are still talking about it, and the studio's like, hey, there's enough buzz here. Let's go ahead and throw some Oscar dollars behind it to build that campaign. I think they have a very valid opportunity here. So I think, Toni Collette in the Oscar conversations.
Best original screenplay too.
Yeah,
could definitely be at least a nomination.
Yeah, in particular, I mean, there's like 5 or 6 huge dramatic set pieces that they could draw from for her little sound bites. Like the dinner table scene, for example, when she scolds, the son for calling her out, and something like that moment. I saw it twice in theaters, and that always stands out to me.
The dinner scene is a great example of what makes this film work. It is. There's a dinner scene about 2/3 of the way through the film, halfway through the film, actually. We'll say halfway through the film. And it is just the most uncomfortable thing because
no one's talking, and it's bothering everybody. And so when she finally, she's called out to say what the unsayable, then, the full weight of all of their problems just kind of gets,
it's like once the dirty laundry gets brought up, once the elephant is let out of the room, it just goes through and wrecks the entire household.
It's like you said you wanted to know, but you really didn't want to know.
Yeah, so I think performances, obviously, this is going to be a real strong point. Best original screenplay. So obviously, we think the drama elements work as well. Let's talk a little bit about the horror elements. So obviously, we think the horror elements work rather well, but it kind of touches on the conversation happening on the internet right now. Is this a horror movie?
I think it absolutely is. I think I've heard the argument both ways. Like it doesn't feel like one, and that's what I love most about it. It's really refreshing the way that the horror again is so personal. It's like the loss of a loved one, like how that could be one person's horror film in their life. That they're living in that space, and it deals with that. And it operates the same way, the way it affects, humans, So, I mean, instead of just inserting, a masked killer, like the same fears, kind of, affect us in different ways. But
well, and there's one thing, I don't want to spoil, but there's a certain scene early in the film that it's not a horror thing, but it plays with suspense really well. You see a thing and you see a thing happening, you're like, oh, I see that they're doing something with this item over here. I'm not going to spoil it, but you see it and you're like, oh, this is not going to end well for someone. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but it's that same tension you get of like when you see this, you might as well see the serial killer just like stalking outside the house and start shouting at the screen like, no, don't do it.
I know exactly what scene you're referring to, and without saying it, they kind of subvert that trope there in that way. It presents a conflict, and then a conflict happens, but not the conflict you think is going to happen. Right. So it's much worse.
This is very much a horror film that wants to subvert your expectations for sure.
Yeah, no, there's it does that time and time again throughout the film where you're watching the screen, you see something, you're like, oh, I know how this is going to go. We've seen this movie like a million times, and it doesn't do it. It doesn't do the thing you're expecting it to do on numerous occasions. Right. And I think that's a little frustrating for a lot of viewers. The thing, it's interesting. The conversation, is this a horror movie? Like, this is not a film that is interested in jump scares. It's not interested in the genre tropes at all. Really, I mean, I don't know. It has tropes, but it doesn't utilize them.
The atmosphere is there,
yes.
But I don't know if, like you said, like the follow through, the paint by numbers, the run across the screen, the cat sort of thing, like that they're not interested in the cheap scares.
I think the people who are mostly saying that it's not a horror movie are the types who are in for like The Conjuring or some gorier entries, torture porn or what have you, or the slasher genre. Right. And that's the thing, is that horror is a very multifaceted genre. It's got this is more of a quiet horror up until a point, and we'll get to that. But this is. this is very much kind of steeped in like the Gothic horror tradition, I think, rather than more filmic examples. The history of horror film. This has history of horror film, but it's also horror literature. And so I think that can definitely be off-putting for people who don't often go see, especially when a film like this gets so talked up and there's so much hype surrounding it. There's an expectation, I think, that gets set that I think a lot of people are wanting to see, but they're not getting.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, the expectation thing. And it's interesting to me because I had seen the trailer and it had come out at Sundance before I had seen this movie. And I was like expecting to be shook. Mm-hmm. And I was shook, but I wasn't shook because I had, it wasn't, I think it goes all back to the individual, like what do they actually want from a horror movie? Like I was shook because they're asking some really upsetting questions and exploring some very upsetting things. Yeah. And it's like, I don't feel like any amount of preparation I had could have necessarily really had me ready to not be shook, just because that's the type of story they're trying to tell. I a lot of times I compare The Conjuring to The Exorcist, but a little more modernized. And I feel like this is even more like The Exorcist, but it's still modernized, but in very different ways. Because you're right, The Conjuring does have all the jump scares and all the things people expect, but I also think in a lot of ways it nails the atmosphere really well. Yeah. But this movie doesn't have any of those like jump scares, or it's not interested in like getting your adrenaline running. Like it is. But the movie is not about the adrenaline rush. The movie is
it's less about the plot. It's less about the plot. They're really interested in these people because it is. In many ways, it's like a 5-way kind of character study. Or meditation on grief. So
it's sort of the difference of riding a roller coaster versus witnessing a car accident. Like both are going to be jarring experiences, but for very different reasons.
Yeah,
they're going to unfold differently too. Yeah.
I think that's a great example, and I don't know. It's. I'm glad that this conversation is happening because it's something it's been on my mind a lot in the last year. It's just how internet cultures in general have, despite us being more connected than ever, we found other ways to separate ourselves. So a lot of times we're like out of touch with what other people think. So whenever you see this like brilliant film that, in my mind, is reminiscent of classics. The great horror classics, and someone says it's not a horror movie, I'm like, what are you like? Where does this come from? And it's because they don't have that same language. They didn't see the classics. They saw stuff that started coming out in the 80s and 90s, and it's just an entirely different era of horror, which is not bad. It's an interesting conversation that's been happening, and I'm a little more hopeful that we can reach a consensus on this one. But it's been frustrating to say the least. But no, I agree. This is every bit a horror movie as the greats, and I think this is a great. I think this could be in the. I mean, we'll see, but it's stuck with me. Stands up, I think it's in that conversation.
It also kind of deals with like the family structure and how that dynamic is kind of, because here you have again literal inheritance of different issues. You can see Toni Collette's character is not warm towards her mother's passing. She gives this very dispirited eulogy of her and you notice that she's saying the truth, but she's not saying what people want to hear. She's saying how she truly feels about her. And I thought that really set it up really nicely, because then you kind of see the dynamic of her with her son and her daughter, and how there's not this warmth and this coziness like you would normally see with the family structure. You can tell that they all have been in some way affected by years and years of abuse that just keeps getting passed down, from person to person. But
yeah, you get that vibe very fast. This is not a happy family by any means.
Which I think is another subversion of what we would expect, because typically, in a horror movie, especially of late, the family is usually pretty happy, and it's the supernatural elements that start to
create that problem.
Right.
Here they're exploiting it.
Right. It's there from the get-go, even before the crazy stuff starts happening.
Right. And again, it's the problems, the human drama is all there, and the evil is, this film could exist just as well without the supernatural elements. I mean, of course, it goes really off the rails in the last act, like to where it's fully embracing that horror. But I think that like the horror that is manifested, and the way it manifests itself is just a more thematic way to communicate the ideas of family drama, family trauma, maybe a little bit of angst among upper middle class Americans in the Midwest sort of thing. Like I think all that's there. And the horror is only there. As terrifying as dry as that sounds, that stuff's all like when you really start to break it down, it's pretty upsetting. And so you just add that horror flavor on there, and you have a bona fide.
And they're all haunted. They're all haunted by their choices too. I noticed that. Like the son is haunted by a particular choice that happens, and the daughter, the mother, of course, Toni Collette is haunted by. Her relation, not having a better relationship with her mother, and it just kind of, you can see that.
Well, and the father is haunted by the fact that he can't make his family happier.
Right.
What I mean?
He seems to be the most sensible and pleasant of all of them, or the most positive thinking, at least,
But he's also so detached as well.
Right.
And so it kind of calls into question, his role in all of this.
Right.
What more could he have done?
Yeah. Definitely.
No, absolutely. Well, because by the time he starts to act later in the film, you're like, where have you been this whole movie?
It's kind of too late now. Everyone is pretty much at 100% capacity.
Yeah, well, and little things like keeping secrets from a spouse. You know what I mean? Like there's those little tiny things that they plant throughout the film. You're like, oh, yeah, this is not healthy. This is not okay. And when the chickens come home to roost in the family, that just sets up what I think is a really spectacular ending at the last stretch of the film. I do want to talk a lot about this film and spoilers, so we'll kind of cut to the chase there. But before we do, want to recommend to our listeners who maybe haven't seen the film, or maybe they have and they just want to hear what we think about the film. How would we recommend the film? So of course, here in the Cinematic Schematic, we rate based on are you gonna go out and see it and purchase it? So is this a buyer? Is this a full price film where you go and see it at the 6 p.m. showing on a Saturday? Is it a matinee film? Do you stream it, or is this totally just a skipper?
I would buy it. I'd like to see this film several times. Like to study it actually, because I think it's the first horror film I'm seeing in a long time. That's really kind of. I think It Follows is probably the last one I saw that I really like. They were doing new things with it. Not a perfect film, but another film where
it's an interesting film. I want to rewatch that again.
Right, where it's like there's things going on in there that aren't being done in traditional horror films in the same way here. So I would buy it.
Buyer. Christopher, what about you?
I would buy it as well. It's great to see it in a movie theater, especially where the sound design is concerned. So if you don't have a solid, home theater at home, the experience and what they do with sound is particularly effective in the theater.
Agreed.
But watching it at home too. Even if you don't, beautiful cinematography on it as well. It's a beautiful film. And one that I think does deserve several viewings to really sort of get at the nuances and the subtleties of it.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. It's a visually layered film too. Yeah, I didn't even talk about that. Like this is a film that pops. I love the opening shot of the movie. It's just such a mind fuck. Because the mom I don't think it's in the first shot of the movie. Basically,
it's in the trailer.
They pan in on this house.
The little house
Toni Collette has been making, and because that's what she does for profession. And it kind of like set me up to think, is this all like a dream or, you know what I mean? Like it just sets that atmosphere and that tone though really, really effectively.
Yeah. And it seems to be their outlet. Because she uses that to kind of recreate traumatic experiences.
Oh yeah.
And then her daughter makes kind of makeshift toys out of junk. It's kind of, she's inherited that.
This family's so freaking weird, guys.
So they have their own. The kid's the only one that comes off as like just kind of a normal, like just rebellious teen, but yeah.
Yes, and actually got to give a shout out to Alex Wolf from the Naked Brothers band guy. Yes. That would be the main boy, and Millie Shapiro as well as Charlie. Which is the daughter.
First role, I think, too.
Yeah, very effective.
Yeah,
very, very good.
Very effective. So I definitely second the table. This is it's pretty boring. We all agree. Like this is just an amazing film that you should absolutely buy. And I do have to say, like if you can find, it's been out for a couple weeks now, so it might be a little harder to come by. But finding a good audience with this is a really amazing experience. The South by Southwest audience, and I know you can't replicate that, but was just everyone would feed off each other. Something moves, someone would shout in the back, and then all of a sudden everyone else is more tense. And then especially once that snowball gets bigger and bigger towards the end, it reaches like a fever pitch, and everyone's like losing their minds.
Yeah.
And it was the same way with on a much smaller scale when I saw it. It was on a matinee, but there was people who were like, there was a woman crying in the back of the theater by the time the movie's over. I'm not lying. I was like,
I buy that.
I buy that.
I'm like, is she laughing? Oh no, she's crying.
Yeah. Did you see that thing they did on the website where they did the heart rate meter where they kind of like tested people's heart rate at certain points in the story, and there's points where it just peaks, so there towards the end. I can imagine where, but I thought that was really interesting too, because it does it stays pretty like middle ground, and then it just keeps climbing and climbing and climbing, and then at the end it just doesn't.
Is it funny? Yeah, when I saw that chart, that I was like, oh, I know what happens here and here, and oh, here's this.
Once you've seen it, you can pinpoint what's going on. Yeah,
there's some truly terrifying imagery in this film.
Yeah, imagery. We haven't talked about that. Yeah.
Now, before we go into our spoiler section, I'm just gonna say, like I said, recommends. But I'm thinking about it, and there's just some scenes there's some things you can't unsee.
Yeah.
And I feel like people who have been calling it not a horror movie are the kind of people who laugh at it to disguise the fact that what they're looking at is actually terrifying. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because, oh man, there's like 2 or 3 things I'm like, God, this is twisted stuff. And we just saw Puppet Master, but this is twisted in a different way.
Very different way. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, anyway, just warning for listeners if you haven't seen it yet and you're considering it. This movie is visually... I
came home and cussed out my plant. That's how scary it was. Because I came home in the dark and a leaf brushed past my shoulders and I was already in a tense mood. And so that happened.
You're like, blankety blank, you plant? Yeah. Okay, well, that'll leave it for our review piece. So we all like it. We all think it's basically one of the best films of the year. It sounds like
so far,
large. So far.
Absolutely.
We're only in June, so. But let's go ahead and move on to spoilers. So if you do not want to be spoiled on Hereditary, go ahead and tune out now. Yeah.
Perfect. See what you did there.
You just did it for me. You did it for me. All the work. I was going to edit that in somewhere, but no.
That's perfect.
Yeah, so that's sort of the first sort of spoiler. It's in the trailer, but you'll never hear that sound the same.
No. There was a guy on the second screen. There was a guy in the back of the theater
doing
it. I was like, oh, I hate you.
I hate you.
You're so funny, dude.
Yeah, you're so funny. So we're going to talk about the ending, and this is why I said this is a coming of age film, because this is a coming of age film for the king of Satan.
Satan. Well, hey,
one of the kings of hell. Sorry, one of the 8 kings of hell or something.
Yeah. They are sort of using several different mythologies, I think, with it. Like there's the dukes and princes of hell. Paymon's mentioned in the Ars Goetia, I think, which is like a listing of like 72 prominent demons of hell, and it's really fascinating. But they use the symbiology, the emblem for Paimon from that text, which is from like the 14th century or something like that. So,
that's creepy because they, you know what I mean? Like they actually really delved into like legit real stuff. Right. I think that's what makes it scary. I think that's the other thing that makes it kind of scary. And I'm, I don't know really how I feel about some of these in real world like supernatural elements, but it's one of those things I've always been like, yeah, but you don't screw with that stuff.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
I'm like, they're like Ouija board seances. I'm like, no, I'm like, I don't believe air quotes, but apparently I believe in it enough to say, yeah, but just in case,
let's not.
Let's not play with fire.
Yeah, exactly. So incorporating that like really knee deep in the thought. Another side of it is even if you don't buy the supernatural elements the film puts on, like there's still cults out there that do things like this out there.
Yeah, summon these things.
Yeah, or they decapitate bodies and all sorts of crazy stuff. Yeah. I say that because this is a family. It really is truly it's a family film.
It's a family film.
Yeah,
take your daughters, take your children.
Take your children. Yeah, but it's a film
skip the Incredibles. Just
skip
this is what it's really about.
That's why they showed the trailer during Peter Rabbit.
That's right. Oh yeah, they knew it was a family.
They just knew.
Yeah, those 4 children. That trailer was terrifying.
Yeah, it was scary.
Oh man.
Yeah.
So again, Alex Wolff plays Peter, who is a teenager who he's, for him in the film, of course, he accidentally kills his sister, and it was a pretty pivotal moment in his life. And like from then, that's where he has to kind of breaks down, and we see him kind of slowly descent into he's like led down this path of insanity.
Yeah.
Either way, coming of age.
Well, it very much focuses on Toni Collette a lot throughout most of it, to where you think that it's all going to be focused on her in some fashion. And there's parts that sort of lead you to think maybe she's going to kill him, intentionally or not. And so that third act shift where suddenly now it's very much Peter's story and we're focused on him. Again, another example of how it kind of subverts our expectations,
Yeah.
And I think like the dealing with the grief aspect of it as well, as we mentioned before, is another way in which the film does that, because we're probably thinking like the Babadook, of course, this is about grief. This is about, families dealing with that and how are they processing their grief. But I almost think the grief is a red herring in a lot of ways. Like,
Yes.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
agree.
it's used as a red herring, definitely.
Right. Well, the grief is the thing that's covering up. Again, red herring. It's the thing in the family drama. The grief is what's covering all of the real issue. Like those real issues were all there. The grief is just on top of it. And as to the fact that Toni Collette knew her mom was into some weird stuff. I was paying really close attention to some of those the statues she was making, where she actually, you're like, oh shit, like the whole like
The
her mom was breastfeeding her babies.
Like
and
that's
stuff.
normal.
Yeah, yeah.
totally normal.
Little things like that where you realize, oh, this is really screwed up.
Their
You know what I
family
mean?
is just
It ties in the same way, again, using, I think, the demonology or the worship of this god, satanic king of hell, as a kind of a parallel for deep buried secrets within families, right? There's this underlying thing that her mom passed on without really telling her kids she passed on. In a lot of the same ways our parents pass certain things on to us that we don't realize we pick up on.
Yeah.
And it's that thing, and that's the thing that ends up coming back to destroy the family. And I think
and like
it's
you
really
said,
brilliant.
the evil is really sinister and it's vindictive because it also, like you said, it keeps exploiting them in their most vulnerable moments. Because you have like Anne Dowell's character, for example, she is the only character that has been able to reach or access, Toni Collette's kind of vulnerability with that support group that she goes to. So she invites her over there to talk, to try and summon, her daughter back. And, and obviously she's resistant to it, but then she latches onto it and becomes kind of an obsession. But all the while, you know what I mean? Like this was the grand scheme all along. They were manipulating that family for a long time. So
When it was interesting to me because I didn't pick up on the first time that there's a lot of weird things that happen early in the film. The supernatural stuff really doesn't start until that seance happens. That's where we launch into she welcomes she welcomes it in
Into the house,
whatever it is, and that's when the real exploitation happens, is when she snaps. She pressures her entire family into the seance they don't want to do. Peter's curious and he's vulnerable,
Right,
so he's like, sure, why not? And the dad's just like, not about it, but at the end of the day he gets pressured into it because he doesn't stick up for himself enough. Another thing, he's kind of detached. And that's where you start to see all of the insanity just unfold, and this stuff's terrifying.
it's almost like it keeps torturing them for trying to do better.
Right.
They try to do better and then they get punished for it. Because, like, for example, like she wants her daughter to be a little bit more sociable and engaged. She tells her to go to that party. Please go somewhere and do something, and then it backfires in a really horrific way.
Well,
That whole sequence is just so, yeah.
But it does call into question too. Like, I mean, this is something that the daughter doesn't want to do.
She didn't want to do it. You're forcing them to do it. Exactly. Yeah.
And then the first thing that I saw, and this was something that like early on when I was watching the film, I started to say, well, this is weird. Is this bad writing? I don't know. And it was the EpiPen aspect of it, which they introduced in very beginning when at the funeral for the grandmother. And Charlie is eating this chocolate bar, and is it Annie? Toni Collette's character is Annie, I believe.
Yeah. It seemed a little on the nose, right? It seemed a little like.
And she was like, "Well, are there nuts in that chocolate bar because we don't have the EpiPen?" And I'm going, "Why don't they have? If she has such a life-threatening nut allergy, why don't they have an EpiPen
on them all the time?" Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then later on, right before Charlie dies. It's the same situation. The reason that she ultimately dies is that they don't have an EpiPen, and she eats a chocolate cake with a bunch of nuts on it. And so again, it really just sort of like, how good are these people really? You know,
Yeah.
how
Or
and
aloof.
how hard are they trying?
How hard are they trying?
Yeah.
Well, and once that whole sequence, like they're chopping the nuts and everything, 'cause I agree with you. Once it was presented, you're like, this is so obvious. They've laid it out. Remember, she doesn't have the EpiPen. You already see what's going to happen before it happens. And I'm like, well, but then,
and then exactly. Well, that's the thing I was talking about earlier. Like, it sets up what would, I mean, like, it's not a serial killer, but it's, the nuts. That's
Conflict.
the serial killer. And you're like, oh, okay, we know how this is going to go down. She's going to eat some, and then something awful is going to happen. That's what the demons come in, or something like that. And then like, it just took a left turn because I mean, it was just an awful sequence to watch where she's just slowly gasping for air, and then just the misfortune of he's not going to call 911 because he's at a party with drugs, and he gets in the car and then just swerve,
And it does just the night scene too of him driving, and just how it's just like this black void. It was that to me. That
and
was
he's isolated. He can't do anything.
Yeah, that was one of the most horrifying moments for me because I've been in landscapes like that where it's like it is so dark out here that you have no idea what's in front of you.
Yeah.
Try driving down any Oklahoma highway. It's out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. It's just the imposing mountains in the back. It's just very horrifying.
And he's
It's like these giant shadows looming over him in the darkness.
Yeah.
Exactly. What I felt walking away from that scene though, when he leaves and goes home after it's like he doesn't blink almost, it's like he's in that state of shock, for that whole period of time, and he doesn't bother to tell them. He doesn't, just he goes to bed, not really, lays down with his eyes still wide open as the whole night passes, and that's how Toni Collette has to come to find her decapitated daughter is in the back of the, and it's just so like. And then I just thought that was constructed so well. It's just so layered, and so it's dark, but it's very effective.
Extremely effective because I agree. You have the drive home, you have the moment where everyone realizes, oh, did this just happened, and it's even worse. Like and you kind of get the assumption they're not going to show this awful thing because when they don't show you immediately, you're like, okay, well, we're just
gonna deal with it.
And her Toni Collette's screams and cries are going to be enough because all it plays really well. It all flows. You're already like just in a state of panic watching it. You're just like him. You're all tensed up. You're like, oh my god,
about how she's going to find out. Like, oh my god, and then you get that little flash of the decapitated head disintegrating with the ants, and I'm just like, that's all you needed.
It's like I want to say it's somewhere between 7 and 10 seconds, but it feels like a minute.
Oh yeah, it feels so long that it's on the screen.
You see the maggots crawling around the face and everything, and it's it's that image is burned into my skull forever.
Yeah,
you've seen it both. You have both seen it twice now, and so I can't recall. Did the screams continue on the soundtrack? Like while they were showing the head?
Yeah,
they did.
Okay,
that's what I thought. Well, and you didn't even you weren't sure if she was decapitated or not.
Not initially, no.
Yeah, you just thought she hit her head, but she wasn't alive. She wasn't alive,
dead, but
that it gave it. It left no questions after that. But
But I think again, it's the idea that these maggots a lot in this movie. I noticed that because there's a lot of dead bodies, but usually you don't necessarily get that as a prominent effect, but I think it's again goes to the idea that this evil is like consuming the family from the inside out. I don't know, just it really matches the thematics of the film. I think that was an A+ sequence, and that's when you get it disarms you in a way. I think
I knew at that point that I was in for something that it wasn't going to go where I was planning, and also because at that point we were so emotionally involved with all the characters that sequence had impact because we cared, about everyone. Normally, we're just waiting for people to get hacked off because we don't care about anybody. Yeah. So I thought that was really effective because I thought
Charlie was just so innocent,
and she was exactly. She did of all the people exactly. Yeah. And as if they hadn't been through enough grief. I love how they kind of the trailer because normally I'm critiquing trailers and how they just reveal way too much. They did a really good fake out in the trailer here because they have Toni Collette like shrieking and sobbing, and you assume, because of what they do tell you in the trailers, that the grandmother passes away, that's what it's from. But that's actually Charlie's funeral.
Right.
And well, of course, we don't know that in the trailer. So I thought that was a really cool way to kind of like, again, trick us or manipulate us into thinking something that's actually not going to happen in the way we think.
Very clever editing with the trailer. Yeah. And very intentional editing from A24. Yeah, I think the supernatural elements work really well for me because, again, it's a subject matter that I find kind of just inherently terrifying because I don't understand it. But I like the once they have this seance and Charlie possesses Toni Collette.
Yeah.
That is...
Yeah.
That was the next scene where I was like, "Oh God, this is just awful." There's all those like weird warning signs that you have, like Ann Dowd across the street yelling at them. You're like, "Oh, this is weird. This is bad." Oh no, it's great.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yelling through the chain linked fence at Peter, just that was so bizarre. And props to Ann Dowd too. She
will do anything, and she will do it well. So.
The old thing about reading the phone book, like I would watch her read the phone book, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would be like, that's a warning somehow.
Dow's in it. It's not good.
But like there was a lot of little things like along the way that I really enjoyed. And if you have any particulars, we're talking, feel free to bring them up. But I jumping to the seance, that's where the heavy supernatural elements come in. Oh, actually, I take it back. Before we get to there, dream sequence. Holy shit! Okay, I mean, there's a lot of dreams. There's a couple of them. The one that stuck out was the
thinner one.
Yes, the dream within the dream.
Yes,
where she dreams that Peter's got those ants all over same maggots and ants all over his face. Again, terror, just unnerving image of all the bugs on a guy's face. Oh, wakes up, it's a dream, and then that's when she like lets it slip and says, "I never wanted to have you in the first place. Mom made me." And that's a great combination of the supernatural, dreamy sequence,
exploiting their anxieties and insecurities about things, and
but it also ties into it's a good history lesson for us, tying into the grandmother's like. How she has just really been a strong arm to this family to doing things they didn't want to do, which is coming back to haunt them.
Right.
I also love that it started as Peter's dream and he wakes up. But then it's Toni Collette's dream. So who was initially dreaming
to begin with?
Of this? And I think that does kind of harken back to the opening shot of the film where we zoom into the model house, the miniature house. And it's real people inside of it, and that motif keeps coming up throughout the whole movie. So there is sort of this question of, well, how, is any of this real at all? What is real and what isn't? And I think that's where Peter kind of is at the end of that, to where, like, one has to imagine that maybe there is some of him left there with Charlie along with him, but we don't really know. We're not even really for sure if Charlie is in there or not,
Right.
And then that's where the film kind of ends with this sort of miniature shot again. So it's like, what is real? What is actually happening here?
Right.
That's a great question. It does end on that, like the treehouse is a tiny little miniature room.
Right. Because we come back out and they zoom out with all of the people, they're kneeling down and worshiping Peter's character. And it's the structure of it. Like, it's like we're looking inward to it. So,
Yeah, that's a great point, Christopher. I hadn't considered that. But I mean, the sequence. So there's the sequence where Toni Collette and her husband, they all get in a fight. He decides, nope, not going to burn the book. She takes it, does it anyway.
Yeah.
In the trailer, by the way, if you're watching real closely, but it's like a blink and you miss it. But I noticed it later. I was like, oh, that's in the trailer where he's
on
just
fire.
Like lights on fire instantly. Again, clever reversal because they'd set it up earlier that if she burns the book, and she even thought she was going to burn. Oh, that entire sequence leading up to that too. I keep doing this backwards. Go to moments and then retro and then roll back. That whole sequence is A++ acting because he is convinced before that scene that encounter even happens that he's sending that email that she is on the brink of, if not in the middle of a psychotic break. And listening to her explain to him what's going on, and because he's been so detached, he doesn't know any of this stuff. So it just might as well sound like crazy gibberish nonsense to him. But we in the audience know that there is some. It doesn't really fully make sense, but like there's enough there. You're like, oh, I know you're talking about something related here, and it all tracks enough that we can follow what she's saying. But in the context of that conversation, he thinks she's actually snapped, and it's really brilliant. I think it's really brilliant for that because there's build up on both sides that it paints them both as real characters, not just like the abusive, obnoxious, ignoring husband or the crazy, frantic woman wife trope. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then of course once the ultimate reveal happens, and it winds up backfiring yet again. She tried to do the right thing, but evil has different plans.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think that was the ultimate takeaway is that, like, nothing, like, if you think you figured this out, you haven't, both from the characters and the audience's standpoint.
Right.
And that too, rules don't really apply with any of this because it makes no sense. I mean, the logic that if she burns the book, she will burn too. She experienced that because she tried to burn the book and then she caught on fire herself. So she has evidence on her side for that matter. But even beyond that, it doesn't make any sense, So the point of that you guys made about how it just sounds like ravings. I think that's what you said is, and it's because it is. It's completely nuts.
It's baiting. They keep baiting them. It's like tease her with something, lead her down that path, and then it pull the rug from underneath. It's always the plan. Always, So it's almost like if it seems so clean cut, it's probably not going to go that way.
Right.
So
Well, I just think it's a great way to utilize a trope. Again, the raving woman, but we as the audience know she's correct, but he doesn't. But you're right. What she's saying is, like, we know enough to know that she's got something. She's saying things that make certain sense.
Yeah, there's a logic there.
There's a logic there that we're kind of tracking that he's not. I think it's really a really clever implementation of that, though, because she isn't right. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because she ends up burning the book and killing her husband.
Right.
Which again, it goes to where you're dealing with supernatural powers that you just don't understand, or in the context of the idea following that parallel of the family trauma that sometimes you think you're doing the right thing for the person, but at the end of the day, you're actually destroying them.
Destroying them.
Yes.
You're literally lighting them on fire.
So that last sequence. So it was really funny. Visual cue I didn't catch the first time. That was super obvious. I don't know if it was probably because it was 3 a.m. But there's a shot of the house during the day, and then it goes to where it goes to night, and then all the people are standing outside. Did you guys notice that? Like that last night shot, it's a pan of that. It's a wide shot of the house where like it's
the very
daytime.
end.
It's really it's before they get to the treehouse. It's like right before he wakes up from the dream.
Okay,
Peter. Okay,
I know the day to night that you're talking about, but I did not notice people.
yes.
In the woods? Are you talking about in the woods?
Yeah, like all around the house. Like they're all over the place.
Yes, I did see that.
I did not, but the first time didn't.
Yeah, I didn't catch
didn't
that.
register, and then the second time I was like, oh shit, there are people. There's the naked people everywhere. I was like, and I don't know.
Enclosed in the house.
Yeah, you can see them all around because they've got like these weird torches or something. You know what I mean? You can but it's not super pronounced. It's like in the foreground. It's covered by shadows, but if you know what you're looking at, you're like, oh
yeah. It makes it very eerie very quickly. That I didn't initially see that sequence when Peter wakes up and Toni Collette is in the corner.
Yeah.
It's
God, that was magical experiences when I saw that. I don't know how long it took. I can't remember how long it took someone to notice, but the second someone did, it was like wildfire across the theater. Everyone goes, oh my God. And then everyone just like gets
freaks out.
And then the second she crawls around the first time, everyone just like goes nuts.
It was a wave in the theater of people realizing, like I was one of the last ones to notice it, but I saw everyone like, they're gasping.
What are they freaking out? What's going on?
What are they looking at? She's right up there. But that was another subversion that I really liked, was that she's up there in the corner and we think, well, she's going to leap down and it's going to be scary, you know? And never does.
Never happens.
Nope.
The tension is still there, but yeah, exactly. The follow through comes later.
Yeah.
And the follow through is also a subversion because the follow through eventually happens when he goes down to the fireplace and you see her once again. She's in the background.
In the corner.
But then she runs out of this totally other side of the room.
Yeah.
You know? Like again,
just out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere.
Just
And again, it's
near.
that bending of logic. It's like none of this is making any sense at this point.
Right.
Right. But yeah, I mean, just that whole sequence is just is amazing. The weird naked people.
The old man in the house that kind of just emerges with that sinister smile,
And he's the guy from the funeral.
Is that who he was?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I saw it twice.
So much creepier.
That makes
he's
it
so
scary.
creepy at the beginning and the funeral. I'm like, who is this guy?
Why is he smiling at this child whose grandmother's dead?
But then you forget about him.
Yeah.
And then, but then there he is again, and you're like, fuck, that's that guy.
So creepy guys at funerals, you don't look in the eye.
If they smile at you at the funeral, then probably no good.
It's over.
It's no go.
It's great because I feel like at that point in the film, Peter's very confused. We're very confused with him. He's not sure if it feels like a dream. He even says towards the end, he's like, I gotta wake up. And we're kind of like, it might be a dream. We're not really sure because we've seen so many dreams throughout the film. And God, the other visual that just really it was, Toni Collette cutting her own head off.
Oh God, yeah, with that
sound,
wire, with the wire.
God, it's so ominous. Like you hear the sound, you're like, oh, that's not good, and it keeps going. And then you're like, oh,
okay,
what's he gonna see when he looks up? And
then you hear that the sound of it rolling. Yeah, it's rough. Also, the image, like I think they kind of juxtapose, like when Peter hits his head up again, he's possessed, and he hits his head up against the desk.
Oh yeah,
it's very similar to when Toni Collette is like beating her head up against the attic ground, trying to get inside. I thought that was really interesting. But
can't forget that. Yeah, again, that was really clever. How was she hitting this thing so many times? Oh my God, it's her
head. That makes it. Yeah.
Again, so back to Christopher's point, though, I think that was a really clever subversion because it kind of goes back and forth from their point of views throughout the film, mostly focusing on Toni Collette, and then we have that big shift at the end.
Yeah,
where we figure out kind of figure out what's going on.
Kind of, yeah.
So, what did you guys think? Did you guys think this ending with the whole him going up to the treehouse and finding out he's actually been groomed his entire life to be a vessel for this King of Hell to be?
I've heard complaints on both sides. It didn't bother me. It did make it made everything very literal at that point. We're now, normally it's a little bit more, it's a little vague, but here by saying specifically this was all geared towards this moment, and you are and then I would have probably could have done without all of the dialogue that was said in the treehouse.
It's a lot.
It's a lot of exposition that was not there previous, and I didn't think we needed it. I think we could have figured out what happened, that he inherited this, unreluctantly inherited this position without Andau saying you are the, and all of the, explaining all the details about it. But I mean, it was a minor. Go ahead.
Well, sorry. At the same time, then it's also like, well, how does this work? Because they talk about how Charlie says that grandmother wanted her to be a boy,
right?
Fair.
And so she, because and Toni Collette's character said that she shielded Peter from her mother when he was first born, and so then because she felt guilty about that, she gave her Charlie, which was her exact words, and a very, very telling way of putting it.
Yeah.
So basically, it was Charlie being groomed this whole time, but they just needed Peter's
body as a host. Yeah.
So and she calls Peter Charlie. Ann Dowd's character calls him Charlie.
Right.
At the end. She says, "Don't. It's okay, Charlie. You're back now, or whatever." But it's also Paimon. So. Who's in
that body?
Yeah.
Or is it all of them? I don't know. I don't know.
And the way Peter Peter's still standing there like, what the fuck is all of this?
Yeah.
Right.
So it could still be him. Maybe Charlie's not in there.
Yeah.
Or Charlie's just in shock. Where's Paimon in all of this,
Yeah.
No, that was a question I had. I thought maybe I'd have more clarity after seeing it another time, and I did not. Because yes, they keep calling Peter Charlie. And they said, "Hey, we had an unhealthy vessel with the girl." So I wasn't sure if initially what they were talking about Charlie, or were they talking about the grandmother? Was she actually a vessel on a failed vessel at one point? Like I was just really confused.
Well, in some way she might be, because there's a significance with the beheading of the three women in the family. The grandmother.
Oh yeah.
Loses her head first, essentially, because unbeknownst to us, her body is in the attic without a head, which we find out later. Then Charlie's beheaded, and then Annie finally beheads herself. So again, how does this sort of fit in? How does that make sense? What's the significance of that? We don't.
There's a level of because there's some of the mythology is not. I mean, because obviously we just get a few excerpts in passing, and if you got a chance to read it in that little blip that they give you. But I remember looking the second time and seeing that image from the book she was reading from, where Paimon is holding the three heads in his hand. So I know it seems like in some form, like that was part of the plan as well. But
Part of the tribute to him or something.
right, but the details of it are somewhat unclear still.
There's something about that whole generational thing that's really fascinating, and I know I'm trying to figure out. Obviously, the idea, the sins of your I mean, it's your and the biblical sins of your father, but in this case, it's the maternal figure. She basically had been plotting this 3 generations of women, all to like make the son the vessel. Yeah. There's something there, and I'm trying to really hard to wrap my head around exactly what that is.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's meaning. Like, I think that there's very intentional the fact that you see 3 different women, all the same bloodline, get killed and decapitated. Also, that the son can be the vessel.
Right.
But I'm not really quite sure if the film's not very clear about what that means, and especially if you try to read it through the lens of family drama. Like, what are these demons that actually haunt you and destroy your family? I'm like, I don't know. My family haven't killed anyone yet in that way
that I know of. Yeah.
Yeah, that I know of. Yeah, exactly. Just this is a spectacular film. I think it works on a lot of levels, and the fact that we're talking about it, I don't think it's cheating us by not giving us more. It's just the right amount of ambiguity. Maybe they could have given us a little more to go off of, but I haven't like gone through on the Blu-ray and watched the freeze framed the book. I'm probably never going to do that. But I think they probably could have given us a little bit more information on that mythology side, maybe. But I think in general, I think it's just enough ambiguity to be interesting and keep that conversation going.
Keep you curious. Yeah.
I honestly think I didn't want for more by the end of it. That could be because I'm just sort of familiar with some of that mythology already. But yeah, I felt like I did kind of feel like if you'd given us any more, it probably would have sort of broken the spell of it.
Right. Yeah. That's the thing. That's the difference between this and Westworld season 2. Like it's ambiguous because I think ultimately it serves the story and the audience because it leaves us kind of like curious, having a conversation about it, which I think is the best thing that can happen.
Intellectually curious,
Yes.
like, yes.
But at the same time, I don't feel like it's so confusing nothing makes sense.
Right.
I mean, a lot of things don't make sense, but in a way that I appreciate.
Yeah, by design.
Not
because it's lazy.
Right.
Wow. Okay, guys. Well, we've talked about this movie for about an hour. Is there anything else you would like to add about Hereditary today for the listeners?
See it. And definitely check out his original short film.
Of course, I didn't even mention his name. Director Ari Aster.
He made a very taboo pushing, like button pushing short film that you can find on YouTube called The Strange Thing About the Johnsons, and it's also a movie about family dynamics, twisted family dynamics, and it got him a lot of praise. Probably, is what put him on people's radar to make this feature film about another dysfunctional family. So there's that. Yeah.
Christopher, anything else you'd like to add on there?
Not so much about Hereditary specifically, but A24 in general. They're consistently putting out really high quality films, and Hereditary is no exception. So.
Yeah,
I like that they keep getting bigger and better. Yeah. I think this film was. I need to check. I want to say it was actually produced by A24. Because sometimes A24 just picks these films up.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to say, I need to go back and check. I want to say A24 might have funded it because they've done this with some of them before too. They might have funded this one, which is a big deal.
I think that's right. I think that's right. Yeah.
But yeah, no, spectacular film. Go out and see it. I'm getting increasingly more curmudgeon, I've realized, about crowd pleaser films, and horror films are also crowd pleasers, even if they're scaring you, air quotes, scaring you. So I appreciate a film that's likes to upset the status quo, but also plays fair enough.
Right. Right.
Doesn't feel cheap or like it's insulting the audience just as much as it's
not mean spirited either. It's not it's a gnarly, upsetting movie, but it's not a mean spirited movie.
Right.
It's not making fun of anyone.
Yeah, doesn't make the audience. It's not like going out of its way to like make us as the audience feel stupid for liking horror films by any means.
Right.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so that'll be our review and kind of deep dive analysis of the spoilers of Hereditary. That is a film that is now playing. Gentlemen, before we wrap up, I want to let the good listeners know where they can find you online. Christopher, we'll start with you.
Best place is to just go to my website. That's www.christopherschultz.com, SHULTZ. And you can find me on Facebook and Twitter and various other places from there.
Ron?
You can find me on Twitter at the name's LaRon, and you can find me on Facebook under my name, LaRon Chapman.
Excellent. As always, you can find me on Twitter at CMastersTalk. That's letter C Masters Talk. Also as CMasters91 on Letterboxd and Instagram. And of course, if you want to keep up with all of the work we're doing here at the Cinematropolis, head on over to thecinematropolis.com. Christopher wrote a lot of Dead Center coverage for us recently. Hearts Beat Loud was a review did. Puppet Master, The Littlest Reich, I think, was another one our listeners of this podcast might be interested in too. So make sure to head on over to thecinematropolis.com. And of course, LaRon Chapman's podcasting us every month. And you've written a lot of awesome things for us as well.
Yeah. Very nice.
So, listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. Next month, we'll be talking about time travel films. So you aren't going to want to miss our future talks. I know Alexander's already very fired up about soundtrack next month. So we will catch you all next time.